Hey everybody, welcome to another video in the technical analysis series. Today we're going to be going over the TTM squeeze, and this is an indicator that I really am not too familiar with. So I decided to bring on Peter Hegedus. He's the founder of the Trader's Path, and he uses the TTM squeeze quite often in his strategy. So I thought he'd be the perfect person to come on and be a guest and tell us all about it, how he uses it, and how he gets an edge in the market. So Peter, thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to learning a little more about the TTM squeeze.
Hey, thanks, Jake. TTM Squeeze is an indicator that we love to use. And there's a lot of mystery about it, and there really shouldn't be. It's actually something pretty straightforward. TTM Squeeze has two main components, which are both pretty simple. One is, and I'm just going to back up a little bit to show you this, is a momentum oscillator, right? So I've got these yellow-orange bars here. I've got these blue bars here, and then these dots down the middle are what we call the zero line. The first component with the TTM squeeze is the momentum oscillator, and that's basically just telling you which way your momentum is going. With that, if my momentum's moving towards the zero line from below, that's considered positive momentum. And it's positive momentum when I cross up through the zero line and I'm pushing up away from it. And then conversely, when I'm coming down, as I am here, that's going to be negative momentum. Or when I dip below and I'm heading down away from that zero line, I've got negative momentum. That's the first basic component. And it's not a perfect relation, but you can see for the most part, looking at this chart, as momentum's going up, price action tends to go up with it. As momentum's coming down, price action is coming down or retracing somewhat for the most part. That's the first simple part. And then we combine that with what we call the actual TTM squeeze. And that's going to be represented here on this chart by the green dots that you have here, or the series of red dots that I have there and that I have there. And with this, green dots is considered not to be in a squeeze. And what I'm actually looking for when I'm looking for charts in a TTM squeeze is I'm looking for these series of red dots. And that is telling me that that particular chart, and this can be used on all time frames. In this case, I have a 30-minute chart of Stitch Fix Up. That's telling me that this particular chart is in a TTM squeeze. And what that means very simply, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on my Bollinger Bands and my Keltner Channels, is a TTM squeeze is telling me that the Bollinger Bands have pinched inside the Keltner channel. So if I look at this chart really simply, you can see in this portion here where I have no squeeze, my Bollinger Bands are real wide. My Keltner channels are down in here, and there's no squeeze at that point. And at that point, you can see the Bollinger Bands kind of acting as resistance. You pop out, and then, as the Bollinger Bands often do, they're going to push stocks back down, or, as you get to the bottom of a Bollinger Band, it may push it back up. But as you come in here and those Bollinger Bands start to squeeze really tight and tuck inside that Keltner channel, it becomes a accumulation signal, basically, or a consolidation signal. That this is building energy. You've got a really tight Bollinger Band, and it's restricting movement and getting ready at the end of that consolidation for a big move.
Wow.
Yeah.
Honestly, I did not know that's how you use that. So it's essentially the Bollinger Bands within the Keltner channels showing that there's just a lot of consolidation going on and narrowing of the range of price.
Correct. Yep. TTM squeeze is when you start to get in a narrow range of consolidation, and that stock typically in a TTM squeeze is setting up for a bigger move. And that move, of course, like any sort of consolidation, you can consolidate for a move up. You can also be consolidating before a pullback. So that's where your momentum. And couple things to point out here. I've got some moving averages that I use. I also have, and I've turned these off, but I'm just going to flip them back on again. I use anchored VWAP quite a bit, but if you do all that and you put Keltner channels and Bollinger Bands on your chart, it's kind of a mess. So the beauty of the TTM Squeeze is I don't have to be constantly watching the Bollinger Bands and the Keltner channels. I can turn those off. And all I need to do is look down at the bottom of my chart, which isn't messing up the rest of the things I have going on the main part of the chart. And I know as soon as I start getting these red dots that those Bollinger Bands have contracted and have come inside the Keltner channels.
Interesting. Okay. And so it looks like you have a few other moving averages on there. Do you use a specific set of moving averages with this particular indicator, the squeeze?
We do, and the three main ones I use, and I have some other things on there, more for daily charts, but for lower time frames, the big ones for me are the EMA 3, the EMA 8, and the SMA 20. And the SMA 20 is actually, if you don't know this, and I'm sure plenty of folks don't know that, it's actually the middle line of the Bollinger Band. So the Bollinger Bands, you have an upper band, a lower band, and a midline. That midline is actually the SMA 20. So those are the main three ones. I have some other ones on here. Very often I turn some of these other ones off when it comes to lower time frames, but these are important to me on the daily. But again, the beauty of this indicator here is I know when that tight consolidation is coming, when a stock is setting up for a bigger move, and it's not making a mess of my upper chart.
And one thing I wanted to point out, so Bollinger Bands, for those that are not familiar with Bollinger Bands are essentially looking at the standard deviation outside of the SMA 20. And so as price action changes, those standard deviations also change. So when you have the Bollinger Bands squeezing like that, it's just telling you that the range is getting very, very tight. And so I'm not too familiar with Keltner channels. What is the difference between those two?
That is an excellent question, and I don't use Keltner channels on their own, so I'm not familiar with the exact thing that's happening there.
Okay.
For me, what's really important is just when you see those Bollinger Bands come inside those Keltner channels, and I get this squeeze signal, I know that stock is setting up for a bigger move.
And is there a particular signal here for an entry? Obviously, everybody's going to have their own strategy on an entry, but is it simply when the red dot goes to green, or what is the signal that it's time to look at this and actually take the trade? Now, this is not advice. This is not anything for those that are watching. Don't go blindly mortgage the house on a TTM squeeze switching from red to green. But what is your particular strategy here?
So for us, it's taking then the squeeze in combination with the momentum bars.
Okay.
So on this particular example with Stitch Fix on the 30-minute chart, this is our absolute number one favorite setup when it comes to the TTM squeeze. And that's when I go into a squeeze, I don't enter as this momentum's going down, and I don't enter just as the momentum changes, but as that momentum comes to the 0 line and starts to cross up, I usually look to get long on that light blue bar there. Okay. And then I want to then see it within a few of these bars do, basically release, or we use the term fire. And that means the squeeze goes off, it comes out of a squeeze, and then it's freed up to move up. Now, a lot of people will look at this little indicator here and say, well, how does that work? How does following these little red dots make any sense? What's really interesting is if I go over to a different workspace here and I have just a blank chart, I've taken all my other indicators off, at least my other upper indicators, other than the Bollinger Bands and the Keltners. And this helps really visualize why this works. Because if I look at the period in the squeeze here, right? If I look at this area right in here, right? What's happening? Well, the Bollinger Band's really tight, and the lower Bollinger Band is acting as support, and the upper Bollinger Band is acting as resistance. And as long as that Bollinger Band is just going to keep going straight sideways, what's going to happen with my price action here? Nothing.
It's just stay there.
Yeah, it's just going to stay there. Let me try to get rid of this little highlight here. But once you start to see the Bollinger Band turn up, which very often is going to coincide with that light blue bar, right? So I go from the yellow-orange bar to the light blue bar. Then what happens is your price action simply follows, and in some cases overshoots. I mean, this was just a huge move in Stitch Fix. But it basically just follows the Bollinger Band up as the Bollinger Band stops that compression and then starts to push up out of the Keltner channel.
Got it. So what if price action broke to the downside on something like this? What would the squeeze do? Would you see just momentum going down again?
Yep, you would see the exact same thing, and typically, and let's just go back and see if we can find one on this 30-minute chart. That's not a good example here, but you would see the same thing. But typically, what would happen is you would see something like this, right, where let's say the squeeze started earlier, and I didn't bring a short example with me here, but we could probably find one if we look a little bit. But basically, what would happen is typically the squeeze wouldn't release as your momentum bars are ascending. It would happen on these descending bars, and that would be a short entry signal. And the same thing happens. So just like the Bollinger Bands here were acting as resistance and then turned up and price action followed them, if the price was following the lower Bollinger Band as this squeeze fired down, it can follow that price down as well.
Got it. Okay.
We can look at a couple other examples of this. Let me actually bring up the Microsoft Daily. That is actually still squeezing, but well, it's actually squeezing on our 30-minute chart as well. But let's go to the daily. This is something I just traded recently and actually took some profits on this one yesterday. But you can see on this one as well, you've got that Bollinger Band really tight inside the Keltner channel. And now I've got the momentum going yesterday from negative, momentum below the zero line to that push above. And that's very often the perfect place to enter. And you can see Microsoft went from 214 to almost 220 yesterday and popped over 220 a little bit today. If that Bollinger Band continues to turn up and this squeeze fires long, this can just keep following that price action up.
Interesting. Well, this is really great stuff. I sincerely learned quite a bit in this video. Just I knew there was the Bollinger Band and the Keltner channel there as a function of part of the indicator, but I didn't realize that was how it works. So this was a great visual representation of how this works, and two great examples. And for those that are interested, you can go to thetraderspath.com. Is that the website if they want to check out your service? Yeah. And how Peter uses these. He uses them all the time, and he really pairs them with some other indicators. Just like, any indicator is used best with a number of other indicators because it just gives you more confirmation instead of just going off of one indicator. So Peter, thank you so much for coming on and doing this video. Everyone, Peter from thetraderspath.com, really explaining this about as perfect as you can with that visual representation as well. So if you guys have any questions, comment below and we'll look and see if we can answer those for you. And remember, you can use this on TrendSpider. It is called the BB-KC squeeze on TrendSpider. So if you just go to indicators, type in BB-KC squeeze, you'll be able to find it. And Peter, once again, a huge thank you for doing this, and thank you for being a guest and sharing your knowledge with the community.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, you're very welcome. And everyone have a great day, and thanks for watching.